Hi, so this is 1.5 GCSE legislation in business, and just to understand what legislation is, it's laws passed by Parliament, and breaking them laws is fine or imprisonment or some kind of sentence. If you break legislation, there will be consequences. Can you think of any legislation? So, for grade 4, you need to define legislation and a range of legal factors that affect business. So, if it asked you about any kind of legislation or that could impact on business, you need to have a handful of knowledge in order to be able to explain that. There are some pretty obvious ones, and there's some perhaps not so obvious too. You explain the range of legal factors and how that impacts a business for a grade 5-6, and I'll be really impressed if you can analyse those factors, start thinking about the positives and the negative impact of legislation for the business and for the consumer, thinking about costs and expenses. The amount of detail and context text that you give will get you the 7, 8 and 9. So should women be paid the same amount of men? Last 40 years we've been campaigning for equality. Do you feel that we should be paid the same? Why is it so important that we are paid the same? Why aren't we paid the same? So there's a couple of employment legislations in regard to payment and discrimination, and these are the Equality Act, which was come out in 2010. Do not worry about the dates for the exam, they're almost irrelevant. And that is about discrimination. And there's all sorts of types of discrimination. You might want to research them in more detail. I will put another video on about discrimination as well. And we've got the Equal Pay Act, and that's trying to take away any inequalities in regard to pay. I mean, obviously the main one is the gender gap, but there are other equalities in pay, and what that act is there to do is to make sure that there is no divide. When you're talking about this, always supplement your theory with an example and link it to the case study, because otherwise it's almost worth very little, a mark if that. So me putting this into context with an example would be the BBC, its top paid stars, all of which are male. What does this show? Does it show a gender gap? And what you would need to do is look at this into more detail to find out, are there any celebrities, BBC actors, actresses, doing exactly the same job and getting paid very differently? And you can have a research into that. But if someone is doing exactly the same job as someone else, then can you justify why one person is getting paid more? And I think with Gary Lineker, there's loads of examples in sport, in fact, how men get paid perhaps more than women. Anyway, equal pay means that it is right for men and women to get paid exactly the same as long as they do the same or the equivalent work. So we've been fighting for this for over 40 years, where men and women have been paid different rates for exactly the same or similar jobs. And the sole reason why their pay is different is purely because one are male and one is female. Now, there are reasons behind why women could be paid less. It might be that they've not climbed the ladder, they've had years out due to maternity leave. It might be that they're part-time, so their career has taken a back step because they're the mother and they're trying to do their job as well as run the family home and bring up the children. Now, that primarily has been the man is the breadwinner, the female not so much, more of the mother, the homemaker. However, we should be challenging those stereotypes, and at the end of the day, if a man and a woman, regardless of whether she's had maternity to leave or not, if she has the knowledge and experience and can do the job and does do the job the same as a man, then their pay should be the same. And I think with the BBC example, Don't want to get in trouble legally by quoting anything wrong, but they are now having to publish the gap, and a lot of larger organisations need to publish the gap and say this is how much we pay men at this role and level in the organisation, and this is how much we pay women at that role and level in the organisation, and they have to be transparent now. So the pay can be audited, if you like, to make sure they're meeting legislation. Any major discrepancies, obviously, they would be answered legally for that. We've got the Sex Discrimination Act. So you cannot and should not limit a job to just one gender. We've got a male taxi driver. We should be able to have female taxi drivers, male plumbers, male electricians, male doctors, female teachers, female nurses. I mean, these are stereotypes. We should be challenging them, but both genders should be given equal chances of getting that job, being promoted in that job, and have training for that job. Also covers dismissal and benefits. So you can't dismiss somebody for being pregnant. You cannot give a benefit to a certain gender either. So you've got to make sure that them benefits are equal, and I think that's even coming in now in regard to maternity leave, where both the male and the female are entitled to shared maternity leave, whereas before it'd be like, right, the man can have up to 2 weeks and the woman can have up to a year. Well, it's not fair. So that has been changed, and simply because people have been campaigning and these laws are changing. So a business has to make sure it meets these, and if not, exceeds them. Disability Discrimination Act. You cannot treat anybody more favourably or less favourably due to their disability, and a business has to make reasonable adjustments to make sure that the working environment is fit for those people. I mean, I've just put an example on their ramps for wheelchair users, but that is putting disability into a very tiny box, because a disability can range through mental health issues, visible disabilities, hearing impaired, visually impaired, and obviously mobility impaired. So, but there can be a huge range. And what it is doing is just saying, we are going to put steps in place so work is accessible to you. So you are able to do your best within that workplace. And it's all about making reasonable adjustments to make sure that it's fair for everybody. Health and Safety Act. It's a big one. Employers have the responsibility to make sure that environment is safe, that the machinery is safe, that the equipment is safe, that they are trained to know what is safe, and there is posters around, warning signs, and making sure that everything is safe. Now, the Health and Safety at Work Act isn't the employer's sole responsibility. It is employees too, to make sure that they meet that Health and Safety Act too. So you've got to make sure that everyone's looking out for each other, basically. And there is absolutely a plethora of different legislation, whether it be safety equipment, temperature, storage. This is a huge act that you could perhaps research into in a little bit more detail. Trades Description Act. This is stopping misleading adverts, mis-selling, packaging, advertising. Everything has got to be inaccurate. Cheryl Cole advert with glossy shampoo said that her hair was so vibrant and strong since using L'Oreal, when in fact she had hair extensions. So totally misleading. That got pulled. There is a lot of examples where businesses are just cutting it so fine, where they are trying to get customers to buy products and services slightly illegally. So this is an example that you might not have seen, because obviously it's been pulled a long time ago. But have a Guinness when you're tired. Guinness is good for you. Guinness gives you strength. It's almost like the Red Bull gives you wings kind of advert, but obviously Guinness are no longer allowed to make these claims. It's against the Trade Description Act and not accurate, not backed by science. The Consumer Credit Act. So the Consumer Credit Act applies to any businesses who give credit, buy now, pay later, anything on a finance. So anything sold on credit. and you must advertise the APR, the interest rates. You must be really, really transparent about what is expected in regard to payment, how much interest you pay annually, and at the end, how much you will actually repay. So it might be a car of 5995, get it on credit, 0% this, that, and the other for so many years. And what it should do at the end is say, that car, yes, it's 5995, but at the end of the credit term, you will actually be paying back 9995. Whatever it works out. I didn't quite think about that example before I started speaking. But basically, how much you're going to have to pay back for borrowing. Weights and Measures Act, it's not very common. I'm going to go through it anyway because it is a piece of legislation that affects businesses. But basically, everything must be accurate. A kilogram bag of rice must be a kilogram in weight. And if it isn't, it might say something like, this was a dried weight, or this was when packaged. So there's got to be some kind of disclaimer about how much that product actually weighs, because we don't want to be ripped off. So it's got to be accurate. And in regard to measures of alcohol and things like that, everything's got to be measured in terms of millilitres, and you'll find that in lots of bars and pubs and things like that, glasses have little markers on so that customers are aware that they're not being shortchanged or ripped off. Food Safety Act obviously only applies to any business selling or making or distributing food. It's all about hygiene. The premises have to be inspected. We don't want to pass anything on or prevent or pass on any illnesses. You think of where we are right now in the middle of COVID-19 lockdown. This act has obviously had additional hygiene measures put into place, obviously in regard to the preparation and delivery of food. So it's all like non-contact, blah blah blah, in regard to packaging and touching it and things like that. Very, very serious. And as you can see, I've just got a little image on there about the food hygiene rating. The higher that is, the more stringent their hygiene is. That doesn't mean to say that just because you get a 2 that you're not allowed to sell food. There are some certain steps where they'll say, nope, you are not allowed to sell food now. So anything with a food hygiene rating of 0, there would in essence be told by the government to close down the premises unless they change. So court orders can be put in place for that. Working time regulations, I have gone mad on this slide. There is no need, but I just want to run down something that you might actually need to be aware of. Average, you should only be working 48 hours a week. Obviously, it does exclude some professions like doctors and surgeons and things like that. There's a limit of an average of 8 hours work in 24 hours. So what they're saying is they don't really want you to be working 12 hours a day. Is an average of 8 hours, but that's obviously got to be over a certain period of time. You have a right to 11 hours rest a day. So a 13-hour shift, not uncommon in some industries, but you are entitled to at least 11 hours rest a day. You have a right to 1 day off. You have a right to 1 day off a week. They are not allowed to say you must work 7 days a week. And I'm just sort of relaying this in case you've got a part-time job and they're making you work over 8 hours a day. They're making you work over a 13-hour shift. And they're saying that you don't have a day off a week. You're entitled to that. You are entitled to in-work rest breaks if the working day is longer than 6 hours. So you should not be doing 7 hours straight. You are entitled to a rest break. And you have a right to 4 weeks paid leave per year. 4 weeks off a year, you are entitled to that. There is obviously more ins and outs in regard to youth employment. Again, that differs in regard to shift patterns on a school night, they're not allowed to expect you to work if you've got an exam or a test, things like that. So if you are working and if you are concerned, please go to the gov.uk website and type in working regulations, and it does actually come up with a regulation dedicated to young people and what an employer can and can't ask of them. And in regard to a business, I think it's just about being aware that you cannot ask your staff to work 12 hours a day every single day. So you have to make sure you build in rest breaks, time off, paid holiday leave.